A millionaire obsessed with control discovers that the woman who cleaned his mansion was hiding more than just secrets. He fired her and followed her home, only to see two children who looked exactly like him. Now, all he wants is to prove that some things are built without contracts, like a child's love. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Stay tuned. Marco Tells surveyed the sprawling Manhattan skyline from his penthouse office, a kingdom built on precision and unwavering control. At 45, he had mastered the art of calculated decisions, transforming his father's modest real estate firm into Thales Enterprises, a billion-dollar conglomerate spanning 3 continents. The local journal had recently named him one of Earth's most formidable business minds, but few understood the obsessive attention to detail that fueled his success. "Mr. Towles, the board members are assembled in the conference room," his executive assistant announced from the doorway. Marco nodded without turning. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes, Rebecca." Alone again, he straightened his custom-tailored suit jacket and adjusted his platinum cufflinks, small rituals that reinforced the image of perfection he had carefully cultivated. Every aspect of his life had been methodically designed, from his modernist Tribeca penthouse to his portfolio of investments. Even his divorce 6 years ago had been executed with surgical precision, the settlement terms negotiated to minimize disruption to his empire. What the financial magazines failed to capture was Marco's pathological need for control, a quality that had isolated him from meaningful connections but propelled him to extraordinary wealth. He trusted nothing to chance and no one completely. Later that evening, Marco returned to his penthouse earlier than usual. The quarterly board meeting had concluded successfully, with profits exceeding projections across all divisions. He should have felt satisfied, but an inexplicable restlessness had been haunting him lately, a vague suspicion that something in his meticulously ordered world was out of alignment. As he entered the vast, minimalist living space, he noticed Elena Rodriguez, his housekeeper of 7 years, carefully dusting the collection of modern art pieces that adorned his walls. There was something about her presence that had been increasingly unsettling him. Not her work, which was impeccable, but something in her manner, in the measured way she moved through his home. "Good evening, Elena," he said, his tone deliberately neutral. "Mr. Towles," she nodded respectfully. "I didn't expect you home so early. Would you like me to prepare something for dinner?" "No need. I'll handle it myself." Marco watched as she continued working, her movements efficient and practiced. At perhaps 38, Elena had maintained a professional distance that he had always appreciated. Unlike other household staff he'd employed over the years, she never attempted unnecessary conversation or displayed curiosity about his personal affairs. Yet lately, he'd caught her lingering too long near the few family photographs he kept, particularly one showing him as a child beside his late father. Something in her expression during these moments disturbed him, a mixture of what appeared to be wistfulness and concealed emotion that seemed entirely out of place. As she moved to clean a silver-framed photograph of his childhood home in Boston, Marco noticed her hands tremble slightly before she composed herself. The reaction was subtle but unmistakable to someone who had built a career on reading the smallest signals in business negotiations. "Is everything all right, Elena?" he asked, his voice carrying the sharp edge of suspicion. "Yes, of course, Mr. Towles." Her response was too quick, too practiced. Marco had built Towles Enterprises by identifying and eliminating threats before they materialized. This inexplicable unease, this disruption in the carefully controlled environment of his home, could not be tolerated. The decision crystallized in his mind with the same clarity that had guided his most successful business maneuvers. He would eliminate the variable. Test the reaction. Analyze the results. "Elena, I need to speak with you for a moment," he said, gesturing toward the kitchen where they would have more privacy from the security staff monitoring the entrance. In the sleek, barely used kitchen, Elena stood with perfect posture, her hands clasped before her, waiting. "I've decided to make some changes to my household staff," Marco began, watching her face closely for any reaction. "Your services will no longer be required after this week." He had expected protests, questions, perhaps even tears. Instead, Helena's expression remained remarkably composed, betraying only the slightest flicker of something unreadable in her dark eyes. "I understand, Mr. Tells. Would you prefer I finish out the week, or should I leave immediately?" Her calm acceptance unsettled him even more than any emotional outburst would have. In business, when someone accepted a sudden severance too easily, it often meant they had anticipated the move, or worse, had a countermeasure already prepared. "You can finish the week," he replied, studying her. "I'll ensure you receive a generous severance package." "Thank you. That's very kind." She paused, then added, "If there's nothing else, I'll finish my work for today." As she turned to leave, Marco felt an unfamiliar sensation, the distinct awareness that he was missing something critical, that there was a piece to this puzzle he couldn't see. The next morning, Marco cancelled 3 meetings and instructed his driver to park a block away from his penthouse. From there he watched as Elena emerged from the service entrance at her usual departure time. She was wearing simple jeans and a blue blouse instead of her work uniform, a small backpack slung over her shoulder. For a man who had built his reputation on rationality, what he did next defied explanation. He followed her. Marco trailed Elena through downtown Manhattan, keeping a careful distance as she took the subway to Brooklyn. In Sunset Park, she merged into a neighborhood that stood in stark contrast to his Tribeca residence, modest apartment, buildings interspersed with family-owned businesses, evidence of a vibrant working-class community. She stopped at a small corner market, emerging with a grocery bag before continuing to a neatly maintained but aging apartment building. Marco waited across the street, feeling increasingly ridiculous. What was he doing here? What could he possibly hope to discover? Just as he was about to leave, Eleanor appeared at a second-floor window, opening it to allow the spring breeze in. She disappeared from view, but then something caught his eye that froze him in place. 2 young boys, perhaps 6 years old, raced past the window, clearly engaged in some game of chase. They appeared identical, twins with dark hair and animated expressions. Something about their features, the shape of their faces, sent a jolt of recognition through Marco's body. He stood transfixed, staring at the window as the boys appeared. Again. One of them leaned out, laughing at something beyond Marco's view, and in that moment his profile was unmistakable. It was like looking at Marco's own childhood photographs, the same distinctive Thales jawline, the same set of the eyes that had passed from his grandfather to his father to him. The world tilted beneath Marco's feet. Impossible thoughts raced through his mind, colliding with his carefully constructed reality. Without conscious decision, he found himself crossing the street, approaching the building entrance where a resident was just exiting, allowing him to slip inside. Standing before apartment 2B, Marco hesitated, his heart hammering with an intensity he hadn't felt in decades. The controlled, calculating businessman was gone, replaced by a man confronting what appeared to be an impossible truth. He knocked, 3 precise taps. When Elena opened the door, her expression shifted from surprise to resignation, as if she had always known this moment would eventually arrive. "Mr. Tells," she said quietly, "I suppose we need to talk." From inside the apartment came the sound of children laughing, oblivious to the earthquake of revelations about to reshape their world. And for the first time in his meticulously managed life, Marco Thales stood on the threshold of a truth he had never calculated for, facing a woman who had kept a secret that would dismantle everything he thought he knew about control. Elena stepped aside, allowing Marco to enter the modest apartment. The contrast between this home and his sterile penthouse was immediate. Colorful children's drawings adorned the refrigerator, well-worn toys were neatly organized in baskets, and family photographs covered nearly every surface. It was chaotic, but warm, filled with unmistakable evidence of love. "Boys," Elena called, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her shoulders, "please go to your room and finish your homework. I need to speak with this gentleman." 2 identical faces peered around the corner, curiosity bright in their eyes that Marco now recognized with devastating clarity as mirror images of his own. "Is he your boss, Mom?" one of them asked. "Yes, Alex. Now please, both of you, do as I ask." The boys disappeared down a short hallway, but not before giving Marco appraising looks that seemed far too perceptive for children their age. In that brief moment of eye contact, Marco felt something shift within him, a tectonic movement in a place he had long believed impervious to emotional tremors. Once they were alone, an uncomfortable silence filled the small living room. Elena gestured toward a simple couch, but Marco remained standing, his imposing frame rigid with tension. "How old are they?" he asked, his voice barely controlled. "They turned 6 last month," Elena replied, meeting his gaze directly. Marco's mind raced through calculations. 6 years and 9 months ago, the company holiday party, a rare lapse in his normally ironclad self-discipline after exceeding yearly projections by 40%. He had barely remembered the encounter the next morning, a brief, meaningless release of tension with one of the catering staff who had later been hired as part of his household team. He hadn't even recognized Elena when she started working in his home. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out harsher than he'd intended. Elena's laugh was soft but devoid of humor. "What would you have done, Mr. Towles? Offered money? To make the problem disappear? Added us to your list of tax deductions? Or perhaps you would have simply had your legal team bury any claim I might make?" Her assessment was uncomfortably accurate. Those would have been precisely his responses 7 years ago, clinical solutions to an unwanted complication. "You've been in my home for 7 years, he said, accusation edging his words, "working in my house while keeping my children from me." "Your children?" Elena's eyes flashed. "You need DNA to claim them as yours, but I've needed nothing but love and sacrifice to make them mine." She took a controlled breath. "I didn't plan to work for you. When the agency sent me to your penthouse, I nearly walked out when I realized who you were. But the pay was twice what I could make elsewhere, and the boys needed stability." Marco paced the small living room, his tall frame making the space feel even more confined. "You should have told me." "To what end?" Elena asked. "You've built your life around absolute control, Mr. Towles. You discard anything and anyone that doesn't serve your purpose. I've watched how you treat people for 7 years. Would you honestly have been a positive presence in their lives?" Her words struck with uncomfortable precision. Marco had never considered himself father material. Children represented unpredictability, messy emotional attachments that couldn't be managed through contracts or intimidation. "I had a right to know," he insisted, though his conviction wavered. "Perhaps," Elena conceded, "but they had a right to stability and unconditional love." She moved to a shelf and picked up a framed photograph, handing it to Marco. "This is their 6th birthday last month." The image showed the twins blowing out candles on a homemade cake, their faces alight with joy. Standing beside them was a man Marco didn't recognize, tall with kind eyes and an easy smile, his arms draped protectively around the boy's shoulders. "Who is this?" Marco demanded, an unexpected surge of jealousy catching him off guard. "That's Daniel Ramirez. He's been part of our lives for almost 4 years now. He teaches 5th grade at the boys' school." Her expression softened. "He knows they aren't biologically his, but it doesn't matter to him. He loves them as his own." The revelation that another man had been fulfilling the role that should have been his, biologically his, hit Marco with unexpected force. It was irrational, this sudden possessiveness toward children he hadn't known existed until today, yet it clawed at him with surprising intensity. "I want a DNA test," he stated, defaulting to the language of verification and proof that had served him throughout his business career. "Of course you do," Elena sighed. "Everything has to be quantified and confirmed in your world." Before Marco could respond, the apartment door opened and the man from the photograph entered. Daniel Ramirez stopped abruptly at the sight of Marco, confusion giving way to dawning comprehension as he looked between the unexpected visitor and Elena. "Elle, is everything okay?" Daniel asked, moving protectively to Elena's side. "It's fine," she assured him, though the tension in her voice betrayed her. "This is Marco Towles, my former employer. Mr. Towles, this is Daniel." The two men sized each other up, a primal assessment that transcended social niceties. Daniel was perhaps a decade younger than Marco, with none of his polished refinement, but an easy confidence that came from comfort in his own skin rather than material success. "The boys mentioned someone was here," Daniel said, extending his hand with hesitant courtesy. "They're pretty curious about your visit." Marco shook the offered hand mechanically, struggling to process this new complication. The casual reference to the boys from this stranger's lips felt like an intrusion into territory that, irrationally, he had already begun to consider his own. "I should speak with them," Marco said. "No," Elena's response was immediate and firm. "Not today. This is all too sudden. They need time to process who you are and what your presence might mean." For a man accustomed to dictating terms, being denied was a foreign experience. Marco opened his mouth to object, then closed it again as the sound of small footsteps approached from the hallway. "Mom, we finished our math," one of the twins announced, appearing in the doorway. His eyes widened at the sight of the adults in obvious tension. "Is everything okay?" Elena composed her expression instantly. "Everything's fine, Tyler. Mr. Tallis was just leaving." The boy, Tyler, studied Marco with undisguised curiosity. "You look like someone," he said thoughtfully, "like someone in our photo album." The simple observation landed like a physical blow. Marco suddenly found it difficult to breathe as the full weight of what he had missed, 6 birthdays, first words, first steps, crashed down upon him. "I'll come back tomorrow," Marco said, struggling to maintain his composure. "We have matters to discuss, Elena." She nodded reluctantly. "After the boys leave for school, 9 o'clock. As Marco turned to leave, Tyler called after him. "Are you coming back to give Mom her job back? She works really hard, you know." The innocent question contained layers of complexity that the child couldn't possibly understand. Marco looked at Elena, at Daniel, at this boy who carried his DNA but had been shaped by their love. "We'll see," was all he could manage before stepping into the hallway, closing the door behind him. Outside the building, Marco stood motionless on the sidewalk, unseeing as Brooklyn life continued around him. For the first time in decades, he had no plan, no strategy, no calculated next move. The control that had defined his existence had been shattered by the simple reality of 2 small boys with his eyes and jawline. He pulled out his phone to call his driver, then hesitated, staring at the screen. Instead, he opened his contacts and scrolled to a name he rarely had reason to use. Dr. Philip Warren, the family physician who had treated 3 generations of Thorns with absolute discretion. If anyone could arrange a DNA test quickly and confidentially, it would be Philip. As he waited for the call to connect, Marco's gaze drifted upward to the apartment window, where he had first glimpsed the twins. The curtain moved slightly, and he caught a glimpse of one small face watching him intently from above. In that moment, something long dormant stirred within Marco Tallis. Beyond the shock and disorientation, beyond the affronted sense of entitlement at having been kept in ignorance, there was something else. A flicker of wonder at what might have been, and perhaps more dangerously what might yet be. "Dr. Warren's office," a receptionist's voice answered, pulling Marco back to reality. "This is Marco Tallis," he stated, his businessman's mask sliding back into place. "I need to speak with Philip immediately. It's a matter of utmost importance." As he ended the call with arrangements made for the following morning, Marco took one last look at the apartment building before walking toward the car that would return him to his ordered, sterile world. But even as the familiar Manhattan skyline came into view, he knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The gleaming offices of Dr. Philip Warren in the Upper East Side stood as a testament to generations of wealthy New Yorkers who valued discretion above all else. Marco sat rigidly in a leather chair, staring at the framed Ivy League credentials on the wall, while the distinguished physician reviewed the preliminary results on his computer screen. "Well, there's no ambiguity here, Marco," Dr. Warren said, removing his glasses. "The probability of paternity exceeds 99.9%. The boys are unquestionably yours." Though he had known the truth instinctively from the moment he'd seen the twins, the scientific confirmation still landed with seismic force. Marco Tallis, who prided himself on leaving nothing to chance, who had deliberately chosen not to have children with his ex-wife, had two 6-year-old sons who had been living just a subway ride away. I'd also like to discuss the medical histories I've received, Doctor. Warren continued, his tone shifting to one of professional concern. One of the boys, Tyler, has shown some concerning markers in his blood work. Marco's attention sharpened. What kind of markers? Nothing definitively alarming yet, but there are indicators consistent with Gardner's syndrome. Seeing Marco's questioning look, the doctor elaborated. It's a rare genetic condition that runs in some families. It can cause various complications if not monitored carefully. Is it serious? Marco asked, an unfamiliar anxiety creeping into his voice. It can be if left unaddressed. The condition typically manifests more fully during adolescence. The good news is that with proper medical supervision, many of the potential complications can be managed effectively. Dr. Warren leaned forward. Does this condition appear in your family history? Marco frowned, thinking back to his father's multiple surgeries during his childhood, always explained away as routine procedures without elaboration. Possibly. My father had health issues that were never fully explained to me. I'd recommend genetic counseling for both boys, and regular screenings moving forward, Dr. Warren advised. Early intervention is key with these genetic conditions. As Marco drove to Brooklyn later that morning, the doctor's words echoed in his mind. He had always viewed his wealth primarily as a tool for power and influence, rarely considering its potential for something as fundamental as safeguarding health. Now those resources might prove critical for Tyler's future well-being. Elena was waiting when he arrived, her expression guarded as she offered him coffee in a chipped mug that probably cost less than the coffee beans he imported for his own use. The DNA results confirm what we already knew, Marco stated, placing his untouched coffee on the small kitchen table. I want to be involved in their lives, Elena. She studied him with the same observant gaze he had noted during her years of working in his home, a gaze that seemed to perceive more than most people. Involved how, exactly? Weekends at your penthouse? Private schools? Trust funds that mature when they turn 18? What does involved mean to Marco Tallis? The question was fair, though it irritated him. In truth, he hadn't thought beyond establishing his legal claim. The practical realities of fatherhood, especially to children who had lived 6 years without him, remained abstract concepts, amis. Their father, he said, as if that simple biological fact settled all questions. Biology isn't parenthood, Elena replied evenly. You provided DNA. Daniel has been helping with homework, attending parent-teacher conferences and comforting them after nightmares for 4 years. She sighed. I'm not saying you don't have a place in their lives, but you need to understand. That place needs to be earned, not demanded. Before Marco could respond, his phone vibrated. Glancing at the screen, he saw his sister Catherine's name and declined the call. It was the 3rd time she had tried to reach him since yesterday, unusual as they typically communicated through their respective assistants. There's something else we need to discuss, Marco said, refocusing. Dr. Warren identified some concerning health markers in Tyler's blood work, something called Gardner's syndrome. It's genetic, possibly from my father's side. Elena's composure faltered for the first time. What kind of health concern? Is it serious? It can be, if not monitored, and treated appropriately. I'd like to have both boys see specialists at Presbyterian. They have an excellent pediatric genetic team. Seeing her hesitation, he added, This isn't about control, Elena. It's about making sure they have the best possible care. The sincere concern in his voice seemed to reach her. She nodded slowly. I'd want to be present for all appointments. Of course. A tentative truce established, they began discussing practicalities. How to introduce Marco to the boys as their biological father, what role he might play in their lives, financial support that would benefit them without undermining Elena's authority. The conversation was interrupted by Marco's phone vibrating again insistently. You should take that, Elena said. It seems important. With a nod of apology, Marco answered, Catherine, I'm in the middle of something. His sister's voice was tight with controlled alarm. Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. Hamilton Pierce called a special board meeting for tomorrow morning. Marco frowned. Pierce was his late father's oldest friend and business associate, now the senior non-executive, director on the Tals Enterprises board. What's this about? He wouldn't say specifically, but Victoria Harrington from legal was on the call. Max, I think someone's making a play. The reference to the company's chief legal counsel, in conjunction with a surprise board meeting, sent warning signals through Marco's mind. Had word somehow leaked about the twins? But how? "I'll be at the office within the hour," he told his sister before ending the call. Elena had been watching his changing expression. "Problems?" "Potentially," Marco admitted. "I need to go, but we're not finished with this discussion." She walked him to the door. "The boys will be home from school at 3:30. If you'd like to meet them, properly meet them, you could. Come by around 4. Her expression grew serious. "But if you come, Mr. Tals, you need to be certain. They've had stability and consistency their whole lives. I won't let anyone disrupt that unless they're committed to being a permanent presence." The gravity of her condition struck him. Elena wasn't asking for his money or influence. She was demanding something far more valuable to a man like Marco Tals: his time, his emotional investment, his unwavering commitment. "I'll be here," he promised, surprised by the certainty he felt. The Tals Enterprises headquarters occupied 30 floors of a gleaming midtown skyscraper, with Marco's executive suite commanding the top floor. As he strode through the corridors, employees scattered from his path, responding to the obvious tension in his bearing. Catherine was waiting in his office, impeccably dressed as always, her features, so similar to his own, tight with concern. At 42, she served as the company's chief financial officer, the only person besides Marco who held both operational authority and significant ownership stake. "What do we know?" Marco demanded, bypassing pleasantries. "Very little." Pierce called the meeting. Victoria prepared a substantial document package that she refused to share in advance. Forrester from PR has also been included. Catherine studied her brother. "Where have you been? Your assistant said you cancelled all your meetings yesterday and today. That's not like you." Marco hesitated. Catherine was his closest ally in both business and personal matters, but even she wasn't privy to every aspect of his life. The existence of the twins wasn't something he was prepared to discuss until he had a clear strategy in place. "I've been handling a personal matter," he replied, vaguely, "one that may soon intersect with company business." Catherine's eyebrows rose. "Does this personal matter have anything to do with Pierce calling an emergency board meeting with legal and PR present?" "Possibly," Marco admitted, "though I don't see how anyone could know yet." A knock at the door interrupted them, as Rebecca, Marco's executive assistant, entered, carrying a thick folder with the Tals Enterprises legal department's seal. "Ms. Harrington asked me to deliver this personally, Mr. Tals. She said it's regarding tomorrow's board meeting and should be reviewed immediately." As soon as Rebecca left, Marco opened the folder. Inside was a preliminary legal brief addressing potential succession and ownership implications regarding newly identified Tals heirs. Attached were several photographs, surveillance images showing him entering Elena's Brooklyn apartment building, and more disturbingly, clear shots of the twins playing in a park, their resemblance to Marco unmistakable. "My God," Catherine whispered, looking over his shoulder. "You have children? How long have you known?" 2 days, Marco answered, a cold fury building as he examined the photos. They had been taken with long-range lenses, clearly without the knowledge or consent of Elena or the boys. "What I want to know is how Pierce found out and why he's convening a board meeting instead of coming to me directly." Catherine picked up one of the photos, studying the faces of her previously unknown nephews. "They look exactly like you did, at that age." She set the photo down carefully. "You know why Pierce is doing this through official channels. The succession provisions in Dad's will are explicit. Control of the company passes equally between direct descendants. If these boys are legally recognized as yours, they each stand to inherit nearly 20% of Tals Enterprises when they turn 25. The implication was clear. As currently structured, Marco controlled 52% of the company, with Catherine holding 28% and the remaining 20% distributed among board members and senior executives. The sudden appearance of two additional Tal's heirs would fundamentally alter the ownership structure and eventually control of the empire their father had founded. "This isn't about inheritance," Marco said firmly. "This is about my son's health and well-being. One of them may have a serious genetic condition." "I believe you," Catherine said carefully, "but Pierce and the other board members won't see it that way. They'll see it as a threat to stability and share value." She hesitated. "There are ways to provide for the boys financially without acknowledging paternity legally. Discretionary trusts, educational funds." "Stop," Marco cut her off. "I'm not going to hide their existence or deny them their birthright." Catherine looked genuinely surprised by her brother's vehemence. "This doesn't sound like you, Max. You've never even wanted children. Now suddenly you're willing to risk control of the company for two kids you've just met." Marco turned to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the city below. Somewhere out there, beyond the gleaming skyscrapers of Manhattan, Tyler and Alex were going about their day, unaware of the corporate machinations their existence had set in motion. "I'm still their father," he said quietly, the words feeling foreign yet undeniably true. "And I won't begin that relationship with a denial of who they are." Catherine stood silently for a moment, then nodded. "All right. If you're certain, then we need a strategy before tomorrow's meeting. Pierce will have his allies prepared." As they began planning their approach to the board, Marco glanced at his watch. It was just past noon. In 4 hours he would meet his sons, not as the stranger who had appeared unexpectedly in their home, but as someone who might, with time and patience, earn the right to be part of their lives. For the first time in memory, the outcome of a high-stakes business confrontation felt secondary to a promise made in a modest Brooklyn apartment. Marco Tales, master strategist and corporate titan, found himself counting the hours until he could sit on a second-hand couch and begin the most important negotiation of his life, not for power or profit, but for the chance to become someone he had never expected to be, a father. The Tales Enterprises boardroom had hosted countless high-stakes negotiations, but few as tense as the emergency session called by Hamilton Pierce. 14 board members sat around the gleaming mahogany table, with Marco at its head, his expression impassive despite the storm brewing beneath the surface. Pierce, a silver-haired veteran of New York finance who had mentored Marco's father, decades earlier, tapped his fountain pen against a leather portfolio. "I believe we all understand why this meeting was convened," he began, his patrician Boston accent carrying the weight of authority. "The succession stability of Tales Enterprises appears to be in question." Marco leaned forward. "Let's dispense with the euphemisms, Hamilton. You've discovered I have 2 sons, and you're concerned about how their existence might affect the ownership structure." Several board members exchanged glances. Catherine, seated at Marco's right, maintained a carefully neutral expression. "2 previously undisclosed heirs represents more than a footnote, Marco," Pierce countered. "It represents a fundamental shift in the company's future governance. Your father established clear guidelines regarding family succession." Victoria Harrington, the company's chief legal counsel, cleared her throat. "Mr. Pierce asked me to prepare an analysis of the potential implications. Under your father's will and the company charter, legally recognized children would each be entitled to inherit significant voting shares upon reaching majority, with full control of those shares at age 25. In the meantime," Pierce interjected, "as their legal guardian, you would control those votes, effectively increasing your voting power from 52 to nearly 68%. Catherine spoke up. "Which should hardly concern the board, as my brother's leadership has resulted in a 300% increase in shareholder value over the past decade." "The question isn't Marco's competence," said Richard Forrester from Public Relations, "but rather the potential for destabilization. If word gets out about previously unknown Tales heirs, particularly under these circumstances, our stock could take a significant hit. The tabloids would have a field day." Marco's gaze sharpened. "How exactly did this information come to the board's attention, Hamilton? Those surveillance photos in the legal brief, who authorized them?" Pierce's expression remained impassive. "The board has a fiduciary responsibility to protect shareholder interests. When rumors surfaced about your unusual behavior and unexplained absences, I engaged a discreet security consultant. You had me followed, Marco stated flatly. I had the company's most valuable asset protected, Pierce countered. Your father would have expected nothing less. Marco controlled the surge of anger, threatening to disrupt his carefully cultivated composure. My father would never have invaded a child's privacy to serve corporate interests. Your father built this company on making difficult decisions, Pierce replied, and now we face another one. These children represent a significant complication to the inheritance structure. He slid a document across the polished table. Our legal team has prepared several options that would provide generously for the boys while protecting the company from succession instability. Catherine picked up the document, scanning it quickly before passing it to Marco. They're suggesting financial trusts in exchange for legal waivers of inheritance rights, she explained, her tone neutral, but her eyes conveying concern. Marco didn't bother to read the details. I'm not signing away my son's birthright. Pierce leaned forward. Marco, be reasonable. You've known about these children for, 2 days? This isn't about sentiment. It's about the 5,000 employees and countless shareholders who depend on Thales Enterprises' stability. This meeting is adjourned, Marco announced, standing abruptly. No decisions regarding my children will be made without my explicit approval. Is that understood? As the board members filed out, Pierce lingered. Your father built this company by always keeping emotions separate from business. I've never seen you forget that lesson until now. Perhaps I'm finally learning a more important one, Marco replied. Alone with Catherine after the meeting, Marco loosened his tie, a rare gesture that betrayed his inner turmoil. They're not going to let this go, Catherine warned. Pierce has been waiting for an opportunity to consolidate power since Dad died. Let him try, Marco said, checking his watch. It was nearly 3:30. Catherine studied him curiously. You're actually going to meet them today, aren't you? These boys you just discovered. Their names are Tyler and Alex, Marco said, gathering his belongings. And yes, I promised their mother I would be there at 4. Their mother, Catherine repeated. Your former housekeeper. Max, I'm trying to understand this sudden transformation. For 20 years, you've organized your entire existence around maintaining absolute control. Now you're willing to upend everything for children you don't even know? Marco paused at the door. There's something you should know. The doctor found markers for Gardner's syndrome in Tyler's blood work, the same condition Dad had. Catherine's expression softened. The surgeries when we were children. Yes, apparently it's hereditary. Marco's voice carried an unfamiliar weight. I need to be there for him, Kath, for both of them. His sister nodded slowly. Then go, I'll handle things here. The contrast between the steel and glass corporate headquarters and Elena's homey Brooklyn apartment couldn't have been starker. Marco arrived precisely at 4 o'clock, carrying 2 carefully chosen packages, results of a rushed consultation with the head buyer at FAO Schwartz regarding appropriate gifts for 6-year-old boys. Elena answered the door, her expression guarded, but not hostile. You came. I said I would, Marco replied simply. Inside, the twins sat at the kitchen table working on homework, their identical faces furrowed in concentration. Marco felt an unexpected jolt of recognition. He had worn that same expression countless times at their age, poring over problems with single-minded focus. Boys, Elena said gently, I'd like you to meet someone important. They looked up simultaneously, their curious gazes fixing on Marco with an intensity that made him distinctly uncomfortable. He was accustomed to commanding rooms full of financial power brokers, yet these small children made him feel inexplicably vulnerable. This is Marco Thales, Elena continued, choosing her words carefully. He's your biological father. The silence that followed seemed to stretch eternally. Marco had rehearsed various scenarios on the drive over, but now found himself entirely unprepared for the directness of their stares. Finally, one of the boys, Alex, he thought, spoke up. Like our real dad? The one in the pictures? Elena nodded. Yes, from the photos I showed you. Tyler, the quieter twin, studied Marco with solemn eyes. Why didn't you ever come see us before? The simple question demanded an equally simple truth. I didn't know about you, Marco admitted. If I had, I would have been here sooner. Mom said you're super rich and have a big company, Alex ventured. Marco glanced at Eleanor, who shrugged slightly. I've never hidden anything from them. Yes, I run a company called Thales Enterprises, Marco confirmed. It was started by my father, your grandfather. Did you bring us presents? Alex asked bluntly, earning a reprimanding look from his mother. Alexander, that's not appropriate. Marco surprised himself by laughing, a genuine sound that felt foreign after the tension of the day. Actually, I did. He offered the gift-wrapped packages, though I wasn't entirely sure what you might like. The twins' initial reserve dissolved instantly as they tore into the packages, revealing precisely matched remote-controlled helicopters, one red, one blue. Their excitement was infectious, and even Eleanor smiled as they immediately wanted to test their new toys. Outside only, she cautioned, and homework needs to be finished first. As the boys reluctantly returned to their studies, Elena guided Marco to the small living room. That went better than I expected, she admitted quietly. They're remarkable children, Marco said, meaning, so you've done an incredible job raising them. Something in his sincere tone seemed to soften her guard slightly. It hasn't been easy, but they've been worth every sacrifice. Their tentative rapprochement was interrupted by Marco's phone vibrating. Seeing Catherine's name, he excused himself briefly. What's happened? He asked without preamble. Pierce just called an emergency executive committee meeting for this evening, Catherine reported. He's moving faster than we anticipated, and Max, he's bringing in Edward Layton. Marco's jaw tightened. Layton was the company's former general counsel who had retired 3 years earlier, but maintained close ties with several board members. More concerning, he had been present during the crafting of their father's will and succession plans. I'll be there, Marco assured her before ending the call. Returning to Elena, he found her watching him with knowing eyes. Corporate crisis. Something like that, he acknowledged. I need to leave sooner than I'd planned. Elena nodded, unsurprised. Your world doesn't stop spinning just because ours has collided with it. Before Marco could respond, Tyler approached hesitantly, holding a folded paper. Mom said you have to go, but I wanted to give you this. He handed Marco the sheet, a carefully drawn family tree for a school assignment, with a new branch freshly added that read, Marco Thales, Dad. The simple gesture affected Marco more powerfully than any business negotiation or financial victory in recent memory. Thank you, he said, his voice uncharacteristically rough. This means a lot to me. Tyler studied him with those serious eyes that seemed to see beyond Marco's carefully constructed facade. Mom says we have to meet the doctor because I might be sick like Grandpa was. Not sick, Marco corrected gently. Just something we need to watch carefully as you grow up. The doctors are very good, and I'll make sure you have the best care available. The boy seemed to consider this thoughtfully. Will you come with us to the doctor? Of course, Marco promised without hesitation. Whenever you need me. As Marco prepared to leave, Alex bounded over, helicopter in hand. Next time, can we go to your big building? Mom said you have a helicopter pad on top. Perhaps, Marco said, looking to Elena for guidance. We'll see, she replied diplomatically. One step at a time. At the door, Marco hesitated. About the board meeting, there may be some complications regarding inheritance matters. Elena's expression hardened. I never asked for their money, Marco. I never asked for yours either. I know, but they're thorns, he said simply. Whatever that means, whatever that entails, they deserve to claim it fully if they choose to. As Marco drove back to Manhattan for what promised to be a contentious evening meeting, Tyler's hand-drawn family tree lay carefully preserved in his briefcase. For a man who had spent decades defining himself through wealth and power, the simple crayon drawing represented something far more valuable, the tentative beginning of trust, the currency he had never truly valued until now. The executive boardroom of Thales Enterprises felt like a battlefield at sunset. The day's most vicious fighting concluded, but the air still thick with tension and unspoken consequences. Marco sat alone at the head of the empty table, tie discarded, sleeves rolled up, reviewing the terms of the agreement that had taken 6 exhausting hours to negotiate. Pierce and his allies had fought relentlessly to protect what they called the company's stability. Catherine had proven herself a formidable defender of family interests, and Marco, for perhaps the first time in his corporate life, had allowed something other than cold business calculus to guide his decisions. The resulting compromise was imperfect but sustainable. The twins would be legally recognized as Tale's heirs with full inheritance rights, but those rights would be administered through a family trust until they reached 25, with Catherine serving as co-trustee alongside Marco. No public announcement would be made until necessary for regulatory compliance, allowing the family time to adjust away from media scrutiny. "You look terrible," Catherine observed, returning from seeing the last board member out. "Thank you for your support today," Marco said, ignoring her comment. Catherine poured herself a small scotch from the boardroom bar. 20 years working together, and I've never seen you compromise like that. You gave up significant control to protect those boys' interests." "They're family," Marco said simply. "Yes, they are." Catherine sat beside him. "Which reminds me, I've arranged for detailed family medical records to be transferred to Dr. Warren. If Tyler truly has Gardner's syndrome, those records might help with treatment protocols." Marco nodded gratefully. "The first specialist appointment is next week. Elena insists Daniel attend as well." "The teacher boyfriend," Catherine said neutrally. "Are you comfortable with that?" The question gave Marco pause. His instinctive territorial response surprised him, a flash of primitive possessiveness that felt entirely foreign to his usual calculated emotional distance. "He's been a positive presence in their lives," Marco admitted grudgingly. "More than I can claim." "Yet," Catherine corrected. "More than you can claim yet." The distinction resonated as Marco gathered his things. "I should go. I promised to call the boys before bedtime." "Another first," Catherine noted with a hint of amusement. "Marco, Toll is restructuring his evening around a bedtime story." Outside, Manhattan sparkled beneath a clear spring sky. Instead of summoning his driver, Marco found himself walking through the city streets, the night air clearing his mind after the boardroom battle. His path took him past brightly lit storefronts, where he paused before a bookstore display featuring children's titles. On impulse, he entered and emerged minutes later, with a bag containing several books recommended by the helpful clerk for 6-year-old boys. At his penthouse, Marco made the promised call, listening as the twins excitedly described their day and the maiden flights of their new helicopters. The conversation felt awkward, stilted by his inexperience with children and their understandable reservations toward this new figure in their lives. Yet beneath the awkwardness lay something tentatively promising, the beginnings of connection. 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of medical appointments, carefully scheduled visits and corporate maneuvering. Marco found himself living in a divided reality, half his world still dominated by billion-dollar decisions and global strategy, the other half increasingly preoccupied with twin boys who viewed him with a mixture of curiosity, wariness, and gradually growing comfort. The delicate balance shifted permanently on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when Marco's phone rang during a critical negotiation with Japanese investors. "Mr. Towles, this is Sunset Park Elementary," a concerned voice began. "There's been an incident involving Tyler. He collapsed during physical education class and has been taken to Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. Ms. Rodriguez asked that you be notified immediately." Marco abandoned the meeting without explanation, instructing his driver to get him to Brooklyn by any means necessary. The 40-minute journey felt interminable, his mind cycling through worst-case scenarios despite his attempts at rationality. At the hospital, Marco found Elena and Daniel already in the pediatric emergency waiting area, their faces etched with worry. "What happened?" Marco demanded, forgetting all professional courtesy. "They think it's an acute complication related to Gardner's syndrome," Eleanor explained, her voice tight with fear. "The doctors are running tests now." Daniel offered a steadying hand on Elena's shoulder. "Alex is with my sister. We didn't want him to see Tyler like this." The unified we grated against Marco's nerves, but he pushed the reaction aside. Have they consulted with the specialists at Presbyterian? The emergency team is in contact with Dr. Abrams now, Elena confirmed. The next several hours passed in excruciating slowness. Marco made calls arranging for Tyler's transfer to the more advanced facilities at New York Presbyterian if necessary. Elena alternated between teary silence and fierce maternal advocacy with the medical staff. Daniel provided quiet, steady support to both of them, occasionally mediating when Marco's demanding approach threatened to alienate the hospital staff. Finally, a tired-looking doctor emerged with cautiously optimistic news. The episode had been triggered by an undiagnosed heart arrhythmia, common in Gardner's syndrome patients, but treatable with medication and careful monitoring. Tyler was stable and asking for his mother. You should go in first, Marco told Elena, surprising himself with the deference that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. Elena squeezed his arm gratefully before following the doctor. Left alone with Daniel, Marco struggled with the uncomfortable recognition that this man, this teacher with his modest income and unassuming manner, possessed something Marco could not simply acquire, the twins' comfortable, established trust. Thank you for being here for them, Marco said finally, the words foreign on his tongue, for being there all along. Daniel studied him thoughtfully. They're amazing kids. Being in their lives has been the greatest privilege of mine. He hesitated. Elena was right about you, you know. Marco raised an eyebrow. How so? She always said you weren't just the cold businessman everyone thought, that there was more depth there, just buried deep. Daniel shrugged. I didn't believe her until today. Before Marco could respond, a nurse approached. Mr. Towles, your son is asking for you. The simple phrase, your son, landed with unexpected weight. Marco followed the nurse to Tyler's room, where the boy looked alarmingly small and pale against the hospital sheets, various monitors beeping steadily around him. Hey, buddy, Marco said, gently, using the casual address he'd heard Daniel employ. Tyler's serious eyes found his. Mum said you made the doctors from your big hospital help me. The doctors here are very good, Marco assured him, but yes, I made sure the specialists knew exactly how to help you. Tyler seemed to consider this carefully. Are you going to stay? Alex says you probably won't because you're too busy with your company. The direct question pierced through Marco's carefully constructed defenses. I'm not going anywhere, Tyler. I have a lot to learn about being a dad, but I promise I'm going to be here. Tyler's small hand found his, and Marco felt something fundamental shift within his carefully ordered universe. Later that evening, with Tyler stabilized and resting comfortably under Elena's watchful eye, Marco stepped outside to take a call from Catherine. How is he? She asked without preamble. Better. They're keeping him overnight for observation, but the medication seems to be working. Marco rubbed his tired eyes. Pierce called an emergency meeting, didn't he? News travels fast. Yes, for tomorrow morning. Apparently your abrupt departure from the Japanese negotiation caused quite a stir. Pierce is suggesting that your family distractions are compromising your leadership. Marco felt a familiar surge of competitive anger, then something unexpected, a profound indifference to Pierce's corporate maneuvering. Let him try, I'll be there. Are you sure no one would blame you for staying with Tyler? I can do both, Marco insisted, though the conviction in his voice wavered slightly. When he re-entered the hospital room, Marco found Elena dozing in a chair beside Tyler's bed, her hand still clasping her son's. Daniel had taken Alex home for the night, promising to return in the morning. Marco settled into the remaining chair, prepared for a long night of watching over his son. Sometime after midnight, Elena stirred. You should go home and rest. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. I'm staying, Marco said simply. She studied him in the dim light. Catherine called about the board meeting, didn't she? News travels fast in both our worlds, it seems. Go handle your business empire, Marco. We've managed without you for 6 years. We can manage a few more hours. That's exactly the point, Marco replied, his voice low but intense. You've managed without me for too long. I'm not making that mistake again." Elena's expression softened with surprise. Before she could respond, Tyler stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Dad, you're still here?" The word "Dad," spoken for the first time, stunned Marco into momentary silence. "Yes," he finally managed, "I'm still here." By morning, Tyler had improved significantly. The doctors confirmed he could go home with medication and a follow-up appointment scheduled for the following week. As Elena helped him dress, Marco stepped outside to call Catherine. "I won't be at the meeting," he told her without preamble. "Pierce will take that as confirmation of his concerns," she warned. "Let him. I'm taking Tyler home from the hospital. Today, that's more important than Pierce's power play." Catherine was silent for a moment. "I'll handle it. Give my nephew a hug from his aunt." As Marco hung up, he caught sight of a familiar figure approaching down the hospital corridor, Hamilton Pierce himself, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit that seemed absurdly formal. "In the pediatric ward." "Hamilton," Marco acknowledged coolly. "This is unexpected. When you didn't answer calls about the emergency meeting, I had my assistant track you down." Pierce glanced toward Tyler's room. "I understand your son was ill." "Is ill," Marco corrected. "He's being discharged today." Pierce nodded thoughtfully. "I've known your family for 3 generations, Marco. Your grandfather built the foundation, your father expanded the empire, and you've transformed it into a global powerhouse." He paused. "Each generation of Thorns has faced a moment when personal desires conflicted with company interests. And each made their choice," Marco finished, "as I'm making mine." "The board is concerned. The board will adapt," Marco interrupted. "Or not. Either way, my priorities have changed." Before Pierce could respond, the door opened, and Tyler emerged in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse with Elena at his side. Seeing Pierce, the boy looked curiously between the stranger and his father, sensing the tension. "Is everything okay?" "Dad?" Tyler asked, the word still new on his tongue. Something in the simple question, in being needed for more than strategic decisions, or financial acumen, solidified Marco's resolve. "Everything's fine. This is Mr. Pierce, an associate from my company. He was just leaving." Pierce studied the tableau before him, Marco standing protectively near the small family unit, and seemed to recognize the immovable determination in his former protégé's stance. "We'll discuss this when you return to the office," he said finally. "Yes, we will," Marco agreed, "but the outcome won't change." As Pierce departed, Elena gave Marco a questioning look. "Corporate politics," he explained briefly. "Nothing important." 2 months later, on a warm summer evening, the spacious backyard of Marco's newly purchased Brooklyn brownstone hosted an intimate gathering. The property, just 3 blocks from Elena's apartment, represented one of many compromises in the new framework of their lives. Alex and Tyler chased fireflies across the lawn, while Eleanor helped Daniel at the grill. Catherine engaged in animated conversation with Dr. Abrams about Tyler's remarkable progress on the new treatment protocol. And Marco, from his vantage point, on the terrace, observed this improbable collection of people who had become, in some unexpected way, his family. The corporate reshuffling had finally settled. Pierce had ultimately backed down when faced with Marco's uncharacteristic but absolute resolve. A new operational structure delegated more daily management to trusted executives, allowing Marco to balance his corporate responsibilities with his newfound commitment to fatherhood. Elena approached, offering him a glass of wine. "Penny for your thoughts." "Just appreciating the view," he replied, gesturing toward the boys. "I never imagined this life." "Neither did I," she admitted. "Certainly not with you as a co-parent." Their relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated. Not romance, but a partnership built on their shared devotion to the twins. Daniel had become an unexpected ally in this arrangement, his genuine affection for the boys transcending any territorial instincts. "Tyler asked about boarding school again yesterday," Elena mentioned. "He seems fascinated by the fact you attended one." "What did you tell him?" "That decisions like that would be made together, as a family." She gave him a questioning look. "That's still the agreement, right?" Marco nodded, watching as Catherine joined the boys' game, her corporate polish momentarily abandoned as she helped them catch fireflies in mason jars. Family decisions made as a family. I'm still getting used to that concept. You're adapting better than I expected, Elena acknowledged, though I notice you still check your phone every 15 minutes. Old habits, Marco conceded, but I'm working on it. As darkness fell, the adults gathered on the terrace while the twins continued their enthusiastic pursuit of fireflies across the lawn. Catherine raised her glass. To new beginnings and unexpected blessings. Marco's gaze lingered on his sons, their laughter, their energy, their unguarded joy, and recognized the profound shift in his own priorities. The control he had once craved had been replaced by something both messier and infinitely more valuable. Later, as he read bedtime stories in the twins' room, a ritual he had come to treasure, Tyler asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. Dad, are you sad that you don't live in your big penthouse anymore? Marco considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. No, I'm not sad. I still have my company and my work. But I discovered something more important than all of that. What? Both boys asked simultaneously. Family, Marco answered simply. The most valuable inheritance isn't money or property or even a company. It's the people who matter to us and who we matter to. As he turned out the light, Marco Tales, former master of the universe, now apprentice in the art of fatherhood, realized that in losing some control he had gained something far more valuable, a legacy worth more than all the wealth and power he had spent his life accumulating. A legacy not of corporate holdings or financial assets, but of connection, commitment, and unreserved love. The empire would endure, reshaped, but resilient. But the true Tales legacy had been fundamentally rewritten, not with contracts and acquisitions, but with bedtime stories and fireflies in mason jars, with hospital vigils and backyard barbecues, with the 1,000 small moments that transformed a mere businessman into something infinitely more meaningful. A father. Dear listeners, we hope Marco Tales' journey from calculating businessman to devoted father has touched your heart. For more emotionally engaging stories that explore the complexity of family relationships, we've created a special playlist that you can find by clicking the link to your left. If you enjoyed this story of transformation and redemption, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique narratives that delve into the depth of human connections